Hello everyone, welcome to Longarming by Jaclyn, and I know this video is going to come out super late, but we are back for not just Top 5 Friday, but this is part of Joy Sewing, and we're going to do my top 5 Wonky Improv Sashings today. So for those of you that have been sewing along with Joy Sewing, you might be starting to accumulate lots of blocks and you want to start to sort of assemble those blocks together and give them maybe in all the chaos a little something that's cohesive. So we're going to talk about some fun ways to do sashings, and these are fun sashings that you can add little details, non-wonky and non-improv if you want, to a normal quilt. By keeping some sizes consistent, you can use these same sashings on a not wonky, not crazy quilt. So here we go. Let's look at my top 5 Wonky Improv, or not, sashing ideas. All right, so all of these sashing ideas will work with or without a cornerstone. So by a cornerstone, you'll have your blocks. If you had like a nice clean grid, they would be coming like that. Sashing is like a border or a frame around each individual block. And a cornerstone is if you put an accent color or accent design where the two sashings, like a grid between your blocks, intersect. So you will have a piece of fabric there. The question is it going to be the same or similar to your sashing, or are you going to do an accent color that is pops versus your sashing? Okie doke. So now that you've decided whether you want an accent cornerstone or just a neutral that's going to coordinate with your regular sashing strip, we're going to talk about the first one. The simplest one is a friendship star. So you will take your Wonky Improv piece and you are going to do a large snowball across one corner of your sashing. So what is a snowball? You can take 2 squares, or in this case I'm using the end of this sashing strip as my square, and this block in a similar size as my other square. Put them right sides together. You'll sew corner to corner and press back. And when you do a snowball, your finished triangle that you end up with in the corner is the same size as your square. This side and this side are the same size as your square. You're not losing a seam allowance worth of fabric when you take this seam. So I started with a sashing. This one happens to be 2.5 inches wide. After I take my seam and press back, it's still 2.5 inches wide. And you will notice that this piece of fabric right here is what gets trimmed away in the bulk. So if you're trying to do fussy cutting, or you know, there's a big flower and you like the color of the flower, put that over here, and when you fold back, this is going to be the face of the fabric that you see. This little bit over here and this little corner over here are going to get trimmed away. And if you've ever heard anyone mention quilter's harvest, that is when you take the seam where you want it, you go about 1/2 inch away, you take another seam, and it saves these little bitty pieces here as a small half square triangle block. And depending on the size of your original block and the sizes that you work with, that might be an extra bit of work that's done for you that you can save up and put somewhere else. So now that I have sewn that and pressed back, I want to make sure that my upper flap covers, and because this is a sashing, it doesn't matter how far this point goes up the side, just some, but this bottom side, you want to make sure that you have full coverage all the way across with your accent color all the way across the end of your sashing strip. And then you can flip that over and just trim it to using your sashing strip as a guide, especially if it's wonky. And if you want to cut away the excess 2 layers of bulk, you can do that as well. So that was the friendship star, and you're basically doing a little snowballed Wonky Improv half square triangle chip on the end of each sashing. For the friendship star, you want to make sure that each one of these is going the same way so you get that rotation going around. Okay, so for our number 2 Wonky Improv sashing option, we will be doing a sawtooth star. Similar to the first variation, you're snowballing the corner of your sashing strips. So this time, instead of snowballing one big snowball across the whole strip, you'll be creating those wonky star legs, snowballing 2 corners. And you can use the same accent color. You can use 2 different accent colors. You can pick a secondary accent color that's different from your central cornerstone. So go with the flow as far as the shape, size, color of your wonky star legs for the sawtooth sashing. Okay, so for number 3, we're going to be doing cornerstones on point or economy cornerstones, depending on how you like to call it. And for this one, we'll actually be starting with an accent piece. So you'll have your cornerstone accent, and this is going to be forming the square in a square economy block setting triangles around. So whatever you want to call those, that is this accent. We're going to start with this. Take your basic sashing color or family group. Sometimes you're not using one color, you're just using colors that are kind of similar. And you'll be snowballing 2 sides of this with your sashing color. And for this version, you just want to make sure that you form a point here, which just means that your 2 blocks need to cross 1/4 inch or more from the edge of your secondary accent piece. And then I'll trim these back to the original shape of my accent. And now I've got the beginning of my economy block accent, and I'm going to take this side that matches the sashing and sew this to the end of my sashing strip. So at this point, we're right at the end. When I took my 1/4 inch seam allowance, I would end up with a little flat tip there. So you want to make sure that from the point where these 2 pieces cross down to where you're trimming off, you leave at least 1/4 inch. And I just have a longer sort of rectangular accent piece. So what I'm going to do is give myself about 1/4 inch from the longest leg of my wonky star legs and trim that off. And there's your cornerstones on point or economy cornerstones, square in a square cornerstones, whatever you like to call that. Okay, so for this next one, we are calling this one Look at My Cornerstones. And you will once again start with your secondary accent color. So your cornerstone can be your sashing color, it can be a different accent color, but this is your secondary accent color here. And you will once again take your secondary accent color, use your sashing color group, and snowball 2 corners of that unit. And similar to how I did before, I'm going to take the longer leg, and you can really kind of decide how you want this for yourself. I'm going to give myself a little more than 1/4 inch past the longer leg. Since this is a longer rectangular unit, I don't need all that. I can just trim that off so it's kind of vaguely square-ish, a little more compact. And this time you're going to take your little triangular and point it away from your sashing strip and add that to the end of your sashing strip. And there you have the Look at My Cornerstone sashing variation. And you can see that because I trimmed on the longer one, I've got a small flat there, I've got a larger flat here, so these are not going to have points. If you wanted that, you would want to make sure that you cover enough of this corner that you can trim, leaving 1/4 inch of overlap. so that when you take your seam, you end up with a nice point there. That's just if you want the point, no one's going to care or notice if you have it or not. So do what makes you happy. And for our last variation, it's going to start out a lot like the on point economy variation that we did. That gives you kind of that square in a square look. You do want to, so I had trimmed this a little bit more square. Pretend this is the same fabric. You'll want a little bit of a longer, more rectangular secondary accent color chip to go here. So as wide as your sashing, at least, and then a little bit longer than a square. So for this variation, I'll be starting with this kind of purpley magenta chip. It's got that rectangular shape, and I will be snowballing all 4 corners. On the short sides, I want to make sure that my legs cross and give me that 1/4 inch seam allowance to retain a point. On the upper sides, they can or cannot. It's up to you. If you care about this being a perfect diamond and you want to retain those points, you can do that. There's nothing that says your diamond can't have a little flat there and become a hexagon. And if you want to make this diamond more compact and square, or long and skinny, depending on how wide your sashing is, it could be tall and skinny this way. It's really up to you to be creative and play around and let those shapes kind of form how they want to form. So there's your Wonky Improv diamond, and if you want it to be 4-sided, make sure that from your point to the edge you leave at least a 1/4 inch and give yourself a good healthy crossover seam allowance. If you lose 2 points, it's a hexagon. Say you meant to make a hexagon. If you lose all 4 points, it becomes an octagon, and say you're the master of making Wonky Improv octagonal chips. So you'll take your little diamond spot and add it to the end of your sashing strip. And there you have your diamond 5-spot sashing accent. And if you wanted to get really fancy, you could take the same or similar cornerstone primary accent. You could also snowball all 4 corners of that, and you would have a diamond in the center as well as at the end of the sashing. You can leave that square. You can use a different primary accent for your cornerstone, or like before, you can have the no cornerstone using a fabric out of the same color family as your sashing, so it blends with the rest of the sashing. So that's it, quick tutorial on my top 5 Wonky Improv sashing accent ideas for your joy sewing quilt. So from the top, it was the friendship star, the sawtooth star, the on point cornerstones or economy block cornerstones, the look at my cornerstone, and if you want to go all in, the diamond 5-spot cornerstone. And these can be done more or less wonky, more or less improv. If you have a quilt that's a little boring and you want to zhuzh it up, feel free to add these. All you have to do is stick to a more consistent measurement, like use all 2.5 inch strips and 2.5 inch squares to make everything line up. And then you've got some creative ideas for non-wonky, non-improv ways to spice up your sashing. So I hope this does something for you, and I hope you hashtag LBJ_joy sewing and show me how you might use some of these sashing ideas. I have seen some other really interesting sashings out there, and if you have one that would be awesome, you could share it with the group. Interesting ways to sash. Helpful if they can be done in a Wonky Improv way and work out with our no measure, no care, nothing is wrong attitude. But there's a lot of really beautiful ones out there that have to be a little more correct to work out right. Maybe next week we'll do fun cornerstones. Have a great day. Bye. All right, too much prattling on.